Good morning, everyone. I'm Angela DiDavo, Artistic Director at Auburn Public Theater in Auburn, New York, part of the Central New York region. And I'm so glad to be here with you all in the fourth of our four-part wellness series. We woke up in Central New York to sunshine, for which I am feeling very grateful. I'm sure lots of other Central New Yorkers are feeling pretty grateful too. And I would like to welcome at this time my dear friend, Barbara Mendez of Barbara Mendez Nutrition. Hi, Barbara.
Yeah, how are you?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. We're wearing matching colors today.
Yeah, look at that. We didn't even plan it.
No, we didn't.
Barbara, do you want to just give a quick introduction for people who are joining us for the first time this morning?
So I am an old friend of Angela's, but I'm also a pharmacist and a nutritionist. So I integrate the two modalities and I help people create a system of wellness that can help them thrive and feel great in their bodies and ward off illness and overcome illness in many cases. So that's the kind of work that I do. And I'm happy to be sharing my knowledge with your audience these last 4 weeks. It's been a lot of fun to spend time with you too.
I think spent more time together in the last 4 weeks than we have in the last decade.
I think so. I think that's true.
In these very scary and unprecedented times, there are certainly lots of silver linings, and this has certainly been one of them. So thank you
Me too.
for showing up. Yep, it's just great
Yeah,
to be in the same space with you, even though
yeah,
it's virtual.
I agree.
Um, we are going to talk today about what we can do to help our young friends at this very strange time. Um, the young people in our lives, our children, our neighbors, our students. Um, do you want to just? I know you have some. You have clients who are young. You have had clients in the past who are young people.
Yeah.
Any kind of
So I think
opening remarks you'd like to make on the subject?
yeah, I think the bigger conversation today is an important one, and we're going to bring on an expert in this area on how children are coping with their anxiety and their stress, and what a parent can do to help them navigate this really scary time. And how much honesty do you want to bring to the table? All those things, which is in not my it's not part of what I do, although I do it a little bit. But we're having an expert come on to talk about that. But nutritionally speaking, I do want to just say that that plays a role in the level of excitability that might be going on in the house. So if you're feeding your kids, or if you're defaulting to low quality foods as a source of comfort, or sugary foods because it's a treat and because you want to give your kids and yourself perhaps something that feels good or gives you some level of comfort, that might be working against your better interests over the long haul of like how you're all managing this emotionally. And whatever nutritional changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, at points in the conversation. Whatever nutritional changes happen in the household really need to happen as a family. So you want to kind of look at what you might be feeding your family in these moments and really take treats and put them in another put them to the side and make them truly special occasions for all of you. I think that in doing so, you're going to find that you'll be able to manage your own mood and your children's moods a little bit better. I actually want to share a story that's not a client story, but I can come back to that client story when we're talking about solutions. It's just something that I remember happening on the subway one time. It was this young couple. They were probably like 20, 21. I could tell they were Latino, and they had a 1.5-year-old. The child was standing, so and she was clutching an enormous big gulp Coca-Cola, or you would imagine it's some sugary thing. And the kid was having an absolute epic breakdown on the subway. And the parents were just sitting there looking at her. They had no idea what to do. They couldn't comfort her. They couldn't do anything for her. They just were watching her, literally screaming her head off as though the subway was like gonna crash in on her. And I remember looking at her and wanting to say to them, it's the soda. That container of soda is almost as big as her body. It's the soda. It's the sugar in the soda. So for people that are not trained to look at it from that angle, they might not see that a child's meltdown has so much to do with what they're ingesting. But for people who know, people who study nutrition, understand what this does to brain chemistry, That's the greatest example I've ever seen of how sugar affects mood. And the helplessness of the parents, like, what do you do in those moments? And you're embarrassed on top of that because you're in a subway and your kid's having a meltdown. It's like, first take the cup away from the child. You know what I mean? Soothe her, pick her up and soothe her, and then stop giving her that stuff. So I say that because if you watch their own trajectory of your own children's consumption and then their behavior, you'll see that immediately after they might have energy, but then, and it might be like a more hysterical energy, and then they're going to be depleted and probably laying on the couch. So watch what happens before you change, before you even take my word for it. Just feed your kids whatever you feed them, and then notice, and then take a break from that behavior and feed them something else, and then notice. And when you see that in front of you, when you see the two comparisons clearly, you'll be able to make better decisions for your family coming from a place of knowledge, your own knowledge, not just secondhand knowledge that you're hearing from me. So that's what I'll say. And then as we talk further about like more solution-based stories, I can come up with stories from my clients, but I think the bigger conversation needs to be about this anxiety that kids are feeling and all the stress and how we cope with it. And I think Sarah is the perfect person to talk to about that.
Yeah, we're so great to have Sarah Redding with us too. Just before we bring Sarah, we have Sarah join us. You mentioned whatever changes you make, having them be family-wide. Can you just speak to that dynamic?
Well,
Why you feel strongly about that?
Yeah, so I'll start just like, to me, like, this is the core thing, and that kind of, highlights the whole thing, is that a child's taste preference starts in the womb. So what the mother literally is eating throughout her pregnancy is what the child's going to prefer to have once they're in this planet, right, on the earth. And then, what plays into that is accessibility. So the mother's eating whatever she's eating, and then if she has that baby and what she's eaten all her pregnancy is vegetables and fruit, then that's what the baby's going to naturally not only prefer, but have access to. If the mother used the pregnancy as an opportunity to eat all the things she never ate, or she prohibits herself from eating because whatever is an excuse, and then she keeps that stuff around as a source of comfort, and there's accessibility, you're going to have a child that's going to not only have a taste preference for, but have access to all those foods that are going to create loads of problems in their future with regards to their health and their behavior. So it really, on the most fundamental basic level, taste preference starts in utero. So if you like extrapolate that outward, what you eat is what your children are going to eat. If you have a child that has been told that they can't have peanuts or they shouldn't have dairy, but they're the only one in the family not eating those foods while everybody else is having chocolate peanut butter ice cream, how is that child going to feel? How successful are you going to be in carrying out that change and then maintaining that change? Because it's not about avoiding dairy or peanuts for a day. It's about a consistent practice of behavior that carries you out the rest of your life. Otherwise, it could kill you, yeah? Or it could really compromise your health. It has to be forever. It can't be for 1 week. This is not a diet in the sense that we've looked at diets like, I do this for a week and I lose 5 pounds and I'm happy, and then I gain it all back. This is a matter of life or death, and it has to happen all the time. So if a child is doing that in isolation, they're not going to do it. And you're going to have a very hard time reinforcing that because you're not doing it. There's a disconnect. Every change that happens on a nutritional level in a family has to happen as a family. It'll benefit the family. It won't make that child feel isolated and alone. It won't make that child feel deprived. It has to be, and because in doing it as a family, you'll come up with solutions and alternatives as a family that suits the unit. So you'll find dairy-free ice creams, let's say, and you'll find other ways to satisfy some of these cravings. And because you're all invested in that outcome and getting those, and having something that you like and enjoy while not hurting the weakest member of the family or the person in the family that can't have it, you'll find the solution faster and you'll all be better off for it. So it must be taken on as a family dynamic. It cannot be just, and I've seen that before. Like, a lot of kids are like, well, this one child has this very specific diet, and it's a nightmare for the parents. It's a nightmare for the child. It creates a lot of stress, and it's very difficult to adhere to. So it really needs to be looked at as a family dynamic.
Great, I love it. Last question, only because you shared this tip with me before, and I thought, I've been making smoothies for so long,
Yeah.
but I have never thought of this before, was your blueberry trick.
Yeah. So, I've mentioned it, I think every episode of our talk so far, but basically, if you want, and this is a great way to get greens into a child's diet, make a smoothie, put banana in there. The recipe's on APT website. Banana, blueberries, 2 or 3 fistfuls of like dark green leafy vegetables. So I like beet greens. They're very good for fortifying the blood, so it's good for anemias and things like that. Good for detoxification. You could do kale though, Swiss chard, spinach, whatever you have. Anytime you see a green vegetable that you might not eat, just freeze it and then throw it in there with a little bit of almond butter if they're not allergic to nut butter. If they're allergic to nut butter, but they can have a seeded butter, pumpkin seed butter is really good. It's very high in zinc, which is great for immune function. And then you can put like a plant-based milk in there and some water and make a nice smoothie that almost everybody likes. You can put a plant-based protein in there. And that's a great way to get lots of nutrition into your kids. It's sweet, it's nice. And there's also an ice cream recipe that I've put on the APT website. It's, with blueberries and bananas, but less liquid. And then I put peanut butter or almond butter in it. Again, you could use this pumpkin seed butter if that's better. And that gives them like a treat without all the sugars and all of that. So both of those things are available already on the site, and that they would be great ways to get nourishment and a lot less, and no additives or preservatives or artificial ingredients into your child, and that they'll enjoy.
And you had a comment about letting that stand, letting the smoothie stand.
So when you add vegetables to a smoothie, if you drink it right away, what will likely prevail is the sulfur quality of some of these vegetables, which obviously will put off an adult, much less a child. So you might want to let it, put them in jars, put them in the refrigerator, let them sit for minimum 30 minutes. You can go longer. So you can make them in the morning and then serve them as an afternoon snack. And as they sit, that sulfur flavor goes away, and then the sugars of the fruit begin to prevail. So what the flavor profile ends up being is on the sweet, fruity side rather than the vegetable side.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's so nice, to know what we can be doing.
Yeah.
I think we're all pretty clear on what we shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But it's good to have tricks and recipes for the things that we can be doing that are nutritious and delicious, so that our young friends will enjoy them and hopefully ultimately seek them out on their own.
Yeah, that would be great. And a lot of times you'll see that happening. And what I've done in the past is that I try to find the hook with a child. Like, I always ask my child clients, like, you like school? You like being a good student? You like science? And if they like science, I explain the chemistry behind this dynamic in the brain, and they find it fascinating if they like science. If they value being a good student, I'll say, well, you know that this starting your day with this sugary cereal might be taking away that little bit of an edge that you might want to just kind of catapult you, from second in your class to first in your class, like whatever. I find an angle that has nothing to do with eating greens and that, with having a healthy diet, because that's meaningless to a child. They don't care. They don't get it. They have no sense of mortality, no sense of being ill unless they've been ill, right? So these are like things that they cannot really grasp. But if you make it like, oh, this is a science experiment. Here's a great science experiment for a kid. Take a pint of ice cream and look at the grams of sugar in that ice cream. Okay, so 1 teaspoon is the equivalent of 5 grams. 1 tablespoon is the equivalent of 15 grams. I want to guess, but let's just use it as an example. In a half a cup of ice cream, there's something like 45 grams of sugar, which is 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now go and take 3 tablespoons of actual sugar, put it on a plate with a contrasting color, and take a look at how much sugar is sitting there on that plate. This is a great thing to do with kids. And then ask yourself, would I take this bowl of sugar and just pour it into my mouth? Never, right? Most people would never do that. By eating it in any other way, you're doing the same thing. So that's a great way to really illustrate, not only for your kids, but for yourself, what you're actually consuming. So 5 grams is a teaspoon, 15 grams is a tablespoon. They express this in grams because most people have no idea what a gram looks like or 5 grams look like. But if you understand teaspoons or tablespoons, you can easily measure it out and see for yourself what you're consuming. And that by itself might be a deterrent.
It's such a good point. I remember when my son was pretty young, and we started looking at labels, and I would say to him, because he would want to choose his own, like breakfast bar or drink from the cooler, and I'd say, anything under 10 grams of sugar, I think would be fine. And it's what you're saying, this has 45 grams, this has 55 grams, this has 60 grams. But when he would find one that would be, let's say, 10, maybe 15 grams of sugar, he'd be so excited. And I remember people seeing him looking at labels, as I'm talking about a little guy, like 6, 7, 8 years old. And I was really grateful to be able to hand him that tool, because we're not always with them. And I think we do want to teach them discernment as early as we possibly can. And I mean, my son's an athlete, so that was always my hook. You
Yeah.
know, this is going to help you become a sharper athlete. So, sugar it tastes good, it's fun to eat, but refined sugar, it has a consequence. So speaking of youngsters, we have another, go ahead. Do you want to make one more comment?
Think about that, because that dynamic in the way that you taught him, instead of saying no, you can't have that, which immediately sets a rebellious mindset in a child, you empowered him with information and left it to him to decide for himself, which is the only way to approach anything, I think, as a parent. Even though I've not raised children, but I honestly think that if you set up a dynamic of you can't do that because I said so, you're going to have a rebellious child in your hand. But if you say this is the information, and this information, this eating that is going to keep you from this successful goal that you want, that's all you need to do. Let them figure it out, and they do. They often will make decisions that are in their own best interest if they understand why they're making it.
I have an advantage there because I grew up with somebody whose parents, I grew up in the late 60s and 70s, whose parents did not allow, there was no television in the house. And so they were 100% not going to allow these children to watch television. So you can probably guess what would happen whenever they visited other people's houses that had televisions. You couldn't get these kids, out of the living rooms. I mean, you couldn't peel them off the screen. And I thought, it's having an unintended, I mean, good for them that there was no television in the house in some ways, but it had that 100% absolutism has its own, can have its own outcome and its own negative result. And so, yeah, I was really afraid that, with both of the children, that if I set myself up, as that, commander in chief of every morsel that went into their mouth, that the minute they got away from the household, they would do the equivalent, with junk food that my friend did with television. So it was good to have had that example. So speaking of youngsters, we have a delightful and dear, dear friend of mine, and now a friend of yours too, Sarah Redding, with us here this morning. Let's cue Sarah Redding.
Okay, hang on. Here we go.
Hi, lady.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for being with us here this
Same
morning.
outfits as last night. I wanted to ask Barbara a question before I introduce myself that I'll probably forget otherwise. Do you ask parents to write things down and sort of keep a record of what changes are occurring when children do things? The reason I ask is I think any behavioral change, if you can produce data for yourself, you're noticing changes for sure. But if you write down, she stopped crying after 5 minutes on Tuesday. On Wednesday, 3.5 minutes, if you're having like a tantruming problem. Do you provide that cue for parents? They're doing the two right things, observing, but then recording. Are they recording too?
So what I have them do is a couple of things. I have them plan their diet so that they have an outline of what they're eating, so it's not last minute decisions, so that keeps them more on track. And then I have them make notes of symptoms. So that here's the diet of what they're eating. If you've changed anything, make those adjustments, and then write down any behavior that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than she stopped crying after 5 days, it's like, this is what happened here, this is what happened here. And then when I look at that, I can say, oh, look, did you see that between here and here, there's like a gap of 3 days that nothing happened? Because it's harder for them in a moment, like there's other kids and there's a million things going on. So when was it that she didn't cry? When was it that, so just make a note, this happened here, that happened there. I call it a symptom diary.
Mm-hmm.
Write down a symptom diary. And then when you plug it in on a day that it happened, I can see what they've eaten that day. I can see what they've eaten the day before. And I could also tie that in, like, oh, you see over here this day, they slipped a little bit and you see what happened over here. But you see this other day, and there's consistent windows. This other day, these few days were perfect. Nothing negative showed up, but then over here, there's a slip again, and that behavior started up again. So they don't necessarily notice it because they might be overwhelmed with a lot of things going on. But when they map it out like that and they show it to me, I'm like, I show them the relationship of what's happening. And it's always like, oh my God, that's That's right.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, method may be slightly different, but yeah, I think people have to see it in writing.
Yeah,
Sometimes they have to see a record to see that there is some change.
for sure.
Yeah.
It's reinforcement. Otherwise, they lose track of what is this really working? And if they don't have that reinforcement that it's working, it's very hard to maintain a dietary change in a family with children. It's very hard. So if only when they see that concrete information on paper that they've written themselves are they able to go, oh, okay, this has value. This is working.
Well, what to say about myself? I have to laugh at the notion of being an expert because childcare in America, I think, is somewhere in the hierarchy of status, sort of around dog catcher. And that's really 37 years working in a childcare setting. One has to remember and learn on one's own that it's important work because it certainly has no status, except among some enlightened people who understand what influences for good or ill are taking place in a child care center. But because we still have no resources in child care to speak of, and who knows where we're going from here on, that I'm not going to talk about today, but I married young. I wasn't pregnant, but I quit college after a year. Be interesting to talk about that, but I won't. And then about age 28, by then I had 2 children and I decided to go back to school, finish my degree. And in the midst of that, of course, I could see, because I was experiencing no child care in the community that really was quality care. When I graduated, I had a psychology degree, and I thought, well, the community doesn't have any really good child care. There was one situation that was closed by the state. I thought I could start one, and I also thought I should start one, a not-for-profit program. And really came from my own struggles with childcare, and also just looking around and saying, well, everybody's in the same boat in this community. A community of about 7,000 people. In about 1988, I enrolled in an interesting program in New York City in Bank Street College. It was an early childhood leadership and supervision degree, specifically tailored to directors of child care centers. I think they were mostly all not-for-profit, if not all of them, directors. What they needed and what they could help to give us. So it entailed everything: diversity training, grant writing, things that we specifically needed. And that was a 3 summers program. And then during the rest of the year, we did a lot. Of course, nothing was online then, but we did it all and sent it by mail and talked to our advisors and professors on the phone. So that was an amazing experience. Then later, we started to think about a building because we were housed in a church and we were very cramped and the need was greater than what we could address. And we have the good fortune of being in a community that has assets in people and, of course, financial assets. People really were the key. People gathered together to help build that building. A lot of grant writing, a lot of government help, private help of the local foundation, the Allen Foundation, which we couldn't have lived without, and it continues that support. So little did I know what I was getting in for. Angela can certainly attest to that history. But we ended up building our own building. I went to an amazing institute at Harvard and Tufts on childcare facility design. A wonderful woman taught it, and she didn't address just the design, but how does the environment and beauty and light and looking at trees and all kinds of spatial issues for children, how does that affect how they feel and how they thrive? After all, some of them are in care for 11 hours a day, which I wish didn't have to happen, but it does in some cases. So children are plunked down in settings that don't meet their needs. And I don't want to stress that, is it beautiful? But really what matters is that children can see out. You can see trees moving. There's a notion that the teacher at the Harvard training brought up that children need physiologically that movement within sameness that the wind brings to trees or water. All of those kinds of things are very soothing physiologically to the nervous system. You know, hence we see children happier almost anywhere than they can be, you know, at the beach, in the sand, in the water. It's, you know, you could just leave them there to live and they'd be fine. But that brought me to the point, I think, where I was ready to really kind of say, the training was really meant to tell people working in child development, you need to own the fact that this is your building and the architect is not to dictate what you need. And that's the important message, to give people a voice. How does this building work? So one of the things we have is family style eating in rooms, where staff sit down and they talk about the food and they pass food around and to children and we chat. And I was talking to somebody the other day about, they start young at saying to children, well, let's not get up from the table until your friends are finished. Let's sit and chat here, sort of to establish what we used to understand was a family meal. So they will talk about anything. You can get a conversation going and it's really quite amazing. Wonderful to tape a lot of it because it's very interesting in a developmental sense, but also very funny and dear. I've been thinking a lot about this issue, and I think in addressing it and thinking about it, I think I'm interested in what parents themselves are experiencing and what they would like to talk about, think about, what they're struggling with. And I think one of the things we have to do again and again is acknowledge the scope of the problem, the size and scope of the problem. And that sort of leads to giving ourselves some rope, some forbearance. I think really, when I think about it, I've told Angela about my niece whose husband is in Mayo, struggling with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, his wife, while Joe was there, participating in a study and a clinical application of a new drug, caught a glimpse of Mike Pence without a mask. And all I could think of is, it's bad enough. And look at what that layered onto that experience. And I talk about berserko. I just thought, people are under stresses that are just unknown to us. And I think the other thing is human beings do not like having no control. And I think the fact that we can't look ahead. My daughter had COVID and she still doesn't know if she has any immunity. We will know soon, but we don't know now. It's all sort of slowly emerging, but there's so much unknown about it. It's so stressful in that way. And I think it's such a huge issue that I think people have already lived through many weeks of it and probably are already adapting in ways that work for their families. But I think to acknowledge how big this is important, and to sort of give yourself a break. And I think the word that comes up is forbearance, which is really all about letting go of some things. I would say I'm sort of a recovering perfectionist. I don't think it's a quality that serves when you're raising young children very well, especially if you add a few pets to the mix. But I think there's so much that we can let go of, that we can sort of say, yeah, so what? That's not important. What is important? And I think there's a program some folks may know about Saturday morning called Hidden Brain. And this week there was a woman on, Sheena Eingar, I think is her name. And she was sort of saying parents ought to think of what is the bare minimum that I have to accomplish today? And pat yourself on the back, and everything else is icing on the cake. Sorry, Barbara. I have to use these metaphors.
I agree. It's like, what's the next rung that I can go after? Like that, I was talking to my dad, we have bad days, but we don't have the same bad day, thank God. And I just said,
Yeah.
Dad, you just got to grab the next rung.
Yeah.
It's just whatever you can reach for, that is a little bit better than yesterday. My mom keeps saying, I just can't believe this is happening. I'm like, Mom, it's been happening for 8 weeks. Stop comparing it to the normalcy of the past, because if you keep saying, I can't believe this is happening, it's like you're going to be miserable. Like you're going to perpetuate your own unhappiness. The past is the past. We will not be back to normal for a very long time. Instead, look around and go, oh, Starbucks is opening up for mobile pickups. People are actually comfortable taking food out from restaurants. Great. Like, look for tiny signs of hope that things are starting to shift in the right direction, because it's the only way you're going to lift yourself out of it. But if you keep saying, oh my God, this is happening and it's never going to be normal again, stop comparing it to the past, because it's not normal. Look for signs of hope,
Yeah, absolutely. I think she talked about taking your dreams off the table, and I think people that might scare people, but focusing on now. I think one of the things that I'm learning about aging is that you have to give up things that you cannot do and you don't like it at all. It's a loss. But then you end up saying, well, what can I do still? Slightly related to what I couldn't do. I might not want to get up on a ladder and paint the ceiling, but you might be able to paint the railings that are at your height. It just sort of is all encompassing when you really begin to think of it. And I think young families are probably already discovering that, have discovered it, are living with it every day. But I don't know. I think I sort of also wanted to focus on the fact that it's not an equal opportunity pandemic. It's just, I think, single parents, to quote this woman from another program, Brigid Schulte, she said, she's written a book called Overwhelmed, Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. And she's saying single parents are the most overwhelmed and time-starved people out there. It's tough, and this pandemic has just made it harder. So for single parents and for other people who are financially strapped, and I mean, it has this hierarchy, we're all struggling, but your mother's struggle is different from the struggle of a young family whose husband has lost his job, and it's just, of course, not hitting us equally or fairly. And you can see it in the death figures, honestly. But I think I was thinking about how to talk with children. I mean, the strategies that might work with children. Angela and I were talking about this, and our center had a tragic loss of a child. It didn't happen at our center, but in the morning one day, a child was gone when his mother went in to get him ready to come to the center, and there were two. And it was really unbelievably difficult for staff to get through, because this was a little guy, a little 2-year-old. People were very attached, and I think more physically, a mother, a father, whatever, the closer people become. So staff were just rough. They were barely functioning. They did function, to their credit, but we all went to the funeral, and the older boy came up to me and said, you want to know where Mark is? He's inside. And I thought to myself, this child is at a stage of concrete thinking in his development. He's confused by what people are telling him, but he knows that much. He knows that's where his brother is. He also mother in his class. We'd had a ceremony, and the animal was put in the earth. He also knew that was going to happen to his brother. But they really children want concrete answers, and sometimes we can't give them. What about death? I think we have to be honest, but we can't scare them. We can't really focus on it. You have to focus on, well, I'm here, I'm going to be here. And as that saying goes, what did I tell you that saying was, Angela? See, we have to stay apart so nothing happens to you and to me. And I'm going to take care of you. And, you know, they will ask, well, are you going to die? And am I going to die? No, probably not. Give children the worst. You end up being sort of like the book Jude the Obscure, Thomas Hardy, the English writer, wrote about the results of having children get the complete story. Is not always good. Terrible. I don't know if Angela, if you were part of this, but that book was banned by the Catholic Church. What happens when you tell children too much? But I think that's a balancing act. How do you tell children the right amount without being dishonest or telling them too much? So I always suggest answer the question simply and the positive aspects. Healthy, I'm not sick, you're not sick, we're going to stay that way. By wearing our mask when we go into stores and whatever you can do to put a positive. And then I think, I was thinking about the types of activities that might help ease the strain.
Can I tie in one thing here that might also be another proactive way, again, to bring in the nutrition value is, as they're asking that question, are we going to be okay? So, and the answer is we're more than likely going to be fine and everything's going to be okay. And this is why it's important to eat an apple, because that has that quercetin. Remember we watched that show, and that quercetin, which is helpful in competing with the virus for attachment in the body. So the foods that contain, like bringing in that conversation is an opportunity to teach them how food can protect their immunity in the middle of this crisis in a very specific way. And it helps them, it adds, are we going to be okay? Yes, which is why we're making these choices with our diet, so that we can make ourselves stronger, which again gives that child, I think, a sense of empowerment. Well, I'm doing something that's going to make me feel better. And that alone can alleviate some anxiety of like, there's a helplessness, like, right? So if I'm doing that and I'm eating okay, and mom said that these foods are good to help protect my immune system, well, that makes me feel like I'm doing something right. And then that makes me feel better. You know what I mean? Like in that conversation, there's an opportunity to bring that to the table as well.
They may own it in a very simplistic way. I'm not going to get sick because I'm eating my kale today. You know, and that's right. All right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we don't have to go to the quercetin side, but yeah, like that, you know, so.
I also thought about what does reassure children. And I must say, just being there, it's enforced being there. It's constancy that you didn't ask for, but that in itself is reassuring to children. And some sense of regularity in a schedule with a lot of flexibility, because this is an odd, yourself a lot of rope and your children a lot of rope. But I think Robert Mueller is one of my heroes, and one of the things he said about his own life was, make your bed. Just do that daily activity every day. What does that do for you? Well, it does something for sure. And I think some regularity for children is critically important. It works with dogs, you know, it works with young children. They need it. And we need it. And even if that's all you can do, and that's
it's funny, Sarah, I was thinking, if I wrote a book about this time, if I were to write a book about how I handled the crisis, it would be titled, First I Make My Bed.
Yeah.
Like, I've actually been thinking that if I wrote a book, I'd write it first. I make my bed because it's the first thing I do every day. It's like, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah, I think it's really, um, I was thinking about choosing activities, and I talked about finding something that's simple that you can accomplish and not drive yourself absolutely crazy. And that is cooking with children in the most simple way that you can find. And one thing that we didn't do this at the center, but it's a recipe my daughter gave me, and it's just buy a pumpkin seeds, usually sold in the bulk areas of stores, but you don't want to buy from the bulk areas now. There's a little prop, this little container of pepitas, and you can roast them in a couple, oh, maybe a tablespoon of butter. There are all kinds of recipes on that you can find online. And children can participate in that. They can spread them out. They can mix up the butter. They can do all of it. And then you can season them with just salt or a million other things. Those kinds of activities that are only about 3 steps are great because you do feel like you've done something. The children can participate. There are other more complex things for older children. Wonderful. And I think it does make you feel like, well, I did that.
Sarah, I just want to say, because I love that. I love that example of roasting pumpkin seeds. And as you said, you can flavor them or season them in hundreds of different ways. And it makes the house smell great. And then you have a treat to share. And it's healthy. So again, it's hard to take things away because, people say, well, I want to provide my child a source of comfort, so I want to make those chocolate cupcakes, or make them together with my child. So roasting pumpkin seeds is such a great substitute product. You're accomplishing all of the same goals.
And I think one of the things that is nice about it is that you, as the parent, get something that's really good to eat too. It's kind of like if you're teaching a child to knit, you want to sort of think about, let's make something that somebody's going to use. Somebody will really about. So, you help your child, you sort of direct them to choosing a fiber your mother might like in a scarf. I mean, instead of just having something that uselessly falls aside and is in the heap of, I think it's really good to find things that people actually like and will use. And food is the same for us. It's find something that really works for the adult too, and that's one of them. And there are many, many, of course. Children can decorate celery with raisins and peanut butter, et cetera, all of those kinds of things. I would say another thing that's really wonderful is to use nature in all of its aspects. Even if you are in a cramped apartment, find some way to grow something. I think the example I gave was buy potted in the groceries, in the produce section, buy some basil in a pot. And there are usually way too many seedlings in that pot anyway. Bring it home, put them on a newspaper, and start pulling apart a little seedling with the roots, and children will join in. You don't even have to say, okay, we're going to do this now. You can just start the activity, and your children will come to the table, and they will want to do it without you saying, okay, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. activity time. I think it's much easier to just put it out there. It happened at the center. Staff would be getting their rooms ready for an activity, and they would be bringing out colorful, all kinds of materials and putting them on the table. Immediately, the children come over to see what's happening. They're not ready yet to come to the table, but they sure as heck want to know what we're going to do, what the materials are, And then they go back to their play for a little while until that activity is ready. And then they're delighted because they are anticipating, you know. But I just think, I remember one was in her 90s. She rooted a plant. And because she'd been a lifelong gardener, somehow that was so meaningful to her. It was a looking ahead. It was some growth. It signified life to her. And I think children are so excited to see chives come up and to be able to get the idea that they came up from a seed and you can eat them. And I would say grow something, even if it doesn't succeed. For a child to watch a seed come up is really quite an amazing process for them.
You could even put a garlic clove that's not been peeled, just one
Right.
clove in a little bit of water, and it'll start to root.
Yes.
And it looks like a chive when it grows, and that's an easy.
Yeah.
And everybody has garlic at home. You can easily
It
do
is.
that. Yeah.
You can pick up a seed packet. There's a company you can buy online. Eden seeds are very. I think doing yoga together just for fun, not to make it a real competitive sport at all, but children love to do yoga. I do not know exactly why, but they love it. A lot of laughter in the process. And I think there are all kinds of things on YouTube for children. And if you get stuck, you can do chair yoga, which is a little easier way to start for children, and quite demanding in some ways, as I can attest. There's also something new out. It's called Julie's Library. It's Julie Andrews, who's now Dame Julie Andrews, and her daughter Emma Walton Hamilton, and they have written 30 books between them. And so they have this new podcast for children and families, and I think it's an hour. That's something that folks can look for on Apple or Spotify, or the less well-known ones like Stitcher, RSS, iHeartRadio. These two women read their favorite children's books, not necessarily their own, and it's interspersed with sounds and music and activities. Authors and children and other guests come, so it's quite a delightful piece. So that's something to look for. There are many, many other things I think parents might be able to help us with if we have any opportunity to ask. Strategies they've developed in the way of activities. I'm not sure where the clock is, but it's almost 10 of.
So you mentioned yesterday PBS.
That's, well, actually, I did. In what context? Do you remember?
Just the programming that's been added to help parents with school-age children.
I can't recall what you're referring. But I will bring up another thing if people don't know about it already, called The Hidden Brain, which is on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, which is in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The host, who I believe is a psychologist himself, tries to tie in new knowledge or old knowledge or folk knowledge or all kinds of psychological sort of information about how we operate as human beings. Much of it is very reassuring. And one of the things I think we haven't talked about, but Angela and I have talked about, I think so much is what is really important is to know that all that we're feeling and experiencing is normal. And that's sort of what this program does. He gives research and examples that sort of say, oh, sigh, good. I'm not the only person experiencing that. This is what happens in this kind of circumstance. Even though it's a war, it's pretty nice to know that other people are sharing the same anxieties, same difficulty with how to move forward, if at all, what do you do when you can't move forward and you can only deal with today? What choices do we make? I mean, there are all kinds of things that come up that I think are very helpful just to be living in it. I'm trying to think of what you were talking about.
I'm sorry, I don't remember any more detail, but I just want to make a comment about that. So very, very early on in this, maybe in the very first week, my dear friend Melody Smith Johnson and I were on a group phone call, and there was something it was such a strange time, right, when we all went into quarantine at first. And she made a comment in this group call about how this is trauma. I mean, she specifically used the word, this is trauma. And it sort of put this kind of big, football stadium size light on it for me.
Yeah.
Just hearing somebody name that word. And for me, it's been it's sort of placed context around everything I'm going through personally, professionally, and especially with my children.
Yeah, it's a big word for big, big, big problem. I was thinking about sort of, when you think about what we're dealing with, how lethally dangerous and therefore how terrifying it is to us. And as somebody said to me, well, Sarah, we're dead if we get it. I thought, yes. And how, and I was thinking about how inconvenient it would be to die right now for my own family, because they're in the middle of their careers, at the peak of their careers. They don't need one more thing, just, so perhaps we could be very careful if possible and not add that to the way they're having to live and their restrictions. But I think, we're living in ways that are sort of unknown to us heretofore. We've always had so many choices. We have restrictions, scarcities, fewer choices, can't plan ahead. We're not in control. People do not like not being in control. And for the control freaks among us, it's got to be really tough, I think, because there are just so many unknowns that you have to let go of. I've talked to you about going to take care of my brother who was dying in the Midwest, and saying one day we'd been to yet another doctor's appointment and saying, just sort of voicing how difficult this was. And he said, well, I think we just have to take one day at a time. There is he didn't say this, but there was no outcome that was going to be good. And every day is likely that it was going to get worse. But let's just take one day at a time. Now, I don't know where that came from. He had been in the Air Force. He flew planes. I don't know where that strength came from, but it's so simple. It almost sounds idiotic. But on the other hand, for these days with children, that's really the theme. Let's take one day at a time. Let's get through this day. And if you can look back at the end of the day and find some sweet moments to think, I did that right. Well, maybe I could do that one better tomorrow. You're finding your daughter or asking your daughter to help your son. It was a wonderful moment. Those kinds of things. Seeing people, when I look out in my neighborhood and see people coming and going, I'm heartened by their resilience. They're out there walking with children. They're doing what they can do. They're just finding ways around it that won't jeopardize their health. But it's very heartening. I think putting in a garden would help most of us. And we may have to do that anyway, for one reason or another. But some of the things that I wasn't very good at are what we need. I think patience is one of the biggest, and forbearance. Yeah, that would be my thought about being helpful.
Well, we are coming toward the end. We just have a few minutes left. I just want to share a thought and then ask you both to comment on it. So one of my favorite writers, Anne Lamott, was once congratulated on a birthday, 59th, 60th, 62nd. And somebody said, oh, you're 60, let's say 62 today. And in the essay, she says, yes, I'm 62, but I'm like a Russian nesting doll. We are all like Russian nesting dolls. I am all the ages I have ever been. I am 1, I am 2, I am 3, I am 4, I am 5, all the way up to and including 62. So this program was certainly intended to help our young people, but also, um, the inner child within us all. And so as we conclude this program, and thank you both so much for being here with us for a little time, any kind of final statement that either one of you would like to make to people dealing with actual children or their own inner youngster?
You want to go ahead, Sarah?
Pardon me?
You want to go ahead and then I'll say something after you?
Oh, I don't know. I think I would say congratulate yourself for having come this far and find ways to keep on keeping on. I mean, and lower your expectations for achieving, and just see if you can not be so tough on yourself. And I think you'll probably find it easier to deal with your children. Not that you're not going to feed them or care for them, but just ease up if you can. And this too shall pass, like all things. It's going to take a while for sure. And that's hard. That's the hardest part, I think. It's not knowing how long. How long? We'll do it. We're Americans, right?
I would say that, while this is definitely a traumatic experience, and I say this to anybody who goes through anything that's really, that turns life, it gives you an about face out of nowhere. Try not to be defined by this experience, meaning don't wear it. Don't wear it, don't carry it around, it's because of this virus. Because that just layers into your mind this hopelessness. So acknowledge it's happening, but then know that it is not defining you. In fact, you can use this as a way to kind of forge a new reality for yourself. And by doing things like, well, what is in my control today? What can I do today that's going to bring my family some sort of a break? Like, can I take them for a walk? Can I make something healthy? Can I have them plant some seeds in the garden? Like, don't be defined by the sadness and this. It's very scary, but don't wear it. Acknowledge it, and then every day set out to do things that will bring brightness into the day in whatever way you can. And if your job is challenged, like, this is one of the things that I think is an opportunity. If you're a person that has lost your job, think deeply about what talents you have, and then see, like, if you're really good at putting together resumes, offer that service up to your community. Whatever you can do really well, give it away. Because in that way, you don't know what you're creating. You're not only alleviating the burdens of other people, right? And you're giving them a sense of hope by sharing your knowledge, right? You're using up time productively in a good way, and people are going to be grateful for it, but you don't know also what you're creating. So if you've lost your job, give it away. Do something for somebody. You don't know where that's going to take you. So try not to wear this. Try to leave it, acknowledge it, but then see what you can create for yourself that is, in the midst of all this, something positive. And then eat well, of course, because that will make it all easier.
Yeah. I see my neighbor walking his dog. He never walks his dog this morning. So yes. Good for him. This is what happens.
Yeah. Lots of silver linings. I have a practice with my children where I ask them to say 3 things they're grateful for before they go to sleep. And so Carrie and I have a 20-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And particularly the 13-year-old son is still very much in the habit of it, because I'm in the habit of it. And it's really interesting these days to hear the things he's grateful for. It almost always makes me laugh. It used to be when I tucked him in, but now it's like I stand behind him as he brushes his teeth. You got anything you're grateful for today? And he knows it's this. The dog is always on the list. He's always grateful for his dog.
Yeah.
And last night he was specifically grateful for what he had for dinner. I know when I go to sleep tonight, I'm going to reflect back on the day and experience again my gratitude to both of you for showing up. I know this has been a wonderful start to my day to be with two of my favorite people at the same time and to be able to see you on a screen together. I so look forward to a time. A mom of an 8-year-old, we were having a business meeting yesterday, and I was asking how her children were doing. She was a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, 8-year-old, and the 8-year-old said she was trying to angle to get to be with her friends for a little bit of time. And she said to her mom, I just need to hug them. I just need to be with them for a little period of time so I can hug them and then I can go back into quarantine. And that is certainly how I feel about both of you. So I'm sending virtual hugs to you.
I gotcha.
One back, right back. And to
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Paula Kanev, who's monitoring our Facebook Live feed, Carrie Idell, our wizard behind the curtain, Janie McLear, to the whole staff at Auburn Public Theater, all of our sponsors who support us and are helping us continue to stay in business so that we can provide content such as today's show. So thank you, everybody, so much. What a pleasure. Keep the conversations going at home. Be kind. Love each other.
Love
And you heard what Sarah said. You just got a hall pass. Moms and dads, just take yourself off the hook.
Yeah.
Everybody, take yourself off the hook.
Thanks, Angela.
Thank you.